square, I know that this is the same. I know that this height is the same here, and the width is 1 7/8 here. I need to know how tall these flaps are, plus the width, how wide my glue flap is, and then I'm measuring the height of this flap, the width at the top, and realizing that they taper. All these flaps are going to taper slightly. They are not straight up and down. That's a big thing I always see with so the reason that they taper is to account for a misfold. If you think of how good you are at mocking up stuff, think that a machine is doing a couple hundred of these per second. This is all mechanically scored and folded and glued. There's not a person sitting there somewhere in China probably doing it. It's a machine. So if this misfolds at all, and it will, like if I get the glue just a little bit off, that's okay. I don't have an edge sticking. I don't have this huge sharp edge. I'd have to really misfold to get an edge over. That's why these taper in. So that even if I'm wrong, but if they're exact squares, you got to get that dead on. Otherwise, you're going to have weird, funky, sharp edges hanging out. That's going to cause, if you've got a sharp edge hanging out, as these are packed, those corners are going to get dinged and damaged, and you're going to start getting shelf damage. So it's, hedging your bets and saying that no matter how this is getting packed, how it's getting folded, it's still going to look really nice. Because damage happens in shipping. So let me draw this on the board for you really quickly so you can see, sort of see, hopefully, how it's all going to play together. But that's the first thing is figuring out any of your dimensions. Now if I said I wanted my box slightly bigger or taller, all I have to do is change the dimension. The box template is still the same. I can just change a width or a height or a depth on any of this, and it will change the dimensions of the box.
I'm going to turn lights on here. So.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. I'm going to turn them off again, but that's cool.
Yeah, guys, I'll put the video on the forum and on Blackboard under like class questions or stuff.
That's cool. Okay. So know that this is 6 3/4. This is also 6 3/4. This is 1 7/8. This is 1 1/4 by 1 3/8. Marker's not very good. And the glue flap is 5/8. Okay. So those are the dimensions. 6 3/4 high by width, 1 7/8 high, 1 3/8 wide, 1 1/4 with that taper, 5 1/8 inch wide glue strip. So now that I've got that, I'm going to make this diagram. So I'm going to set up a new document in Illustrator. There we go. Let's start something new. I'm just going to set it to a tabloid. I'm going to hit print. And I'm going to select a tabloid sheet of paper, landscape, and I'm going to make sure to set this to inches because I'm working in inches. Makes sense to me. I'm going to hit create. So now that I've got this new document set up, I'm going to let Illustrator do a lot of math for me. Math is hard. We didn't go to design school to do math. So I'm going to just set my fill to nothing, stroke is black. I'm going to grab my rectangle tool, hover out over my artboard here, and I'm just going to click down to define a rectangle. And I'm going to enter in those dimensions of 6 3/4, 6.75 by 6.75. Hit OK. I know that that's the correct size. If I just clicked and drew out a rectangle, I might not know. I can adjust it later. I can always numerically enter in the width and the height. But why not just do it once and I know it's the correct size? So cool. I'm going to work a lot with the transform palette in doing this because I'm going to do as little drawing as possible and let Illustrator numerically move things for me. So, because the less I click and drag and move things around, the better, the cleaner it's going to be, the more mathematically exacting it's going to be, the less I've got problems with stuff shifting around or being wrong. So I've got this box. I know that that's the front side of this. I know I need a side portion of it. So I'm going to have it selected. I'm going to copy it, which is Command C. I'm going to do a paste in front, which is a Command F. I'm going to reset the move, the reference point to being the right side, and I'm just going to click my flout and say flip horizontal. Now I've got that exactly moved across. There's a couple other ways you can do that, but that's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to reset the reference point to the left and set the width to being, oh, what is 7/8? 7/8 real quick. Grab it here without my calculator. It's 0.875. There we go. So I'm going to set the width to 1.875. Hit return. Now I've got that side. So I've got back side, front side. Cool. And I have the opposite over there, don't I? Let me move it. So that's fine. We'll just flip the whole thing because I have it wrong. So I'm going to select both of those pieces because I don't really want to do that again. I could keep flipping it, or I can select both of them. And I notice the width together is 8.625 with both of them selected. So I'm just going to hit the return key and set a horizontal move of 8.625, a vertical move of 0. Click preview. I can see that that's moving, and I'm going to click the copy button. Now I've got all four sides butted right up next to each other, how they're supposed to be, in a really quick amount of time, and they're the correct size. It's really easy to do it that way. It would be a lot harder if I was drawing rectangles. I see a lot of students do that where they just click and draw a rectangle and they're like, that's probably close. That looks about right. Well, close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. Your packaging has to be exact, especially if you're doing it for production. Because if it's slightly off, it's going to fold slightly off. So now that I've got those, I actually set this up backwards because I'm looking at the back side. I'm just going to flip the whole thing real quick. So I'm going to set it to middle, flip horizontal. There we go. So that it matches this. So last thing I'm going to do is set for these kind of horizontal boxes before I get to the tabs is my glue tab, which I want on this side. So I'm going to select this box again, and I'm going to do that flip again. So do a Command C, Command F to paste it in front. Set the reference point, flip horizontal, reset the reference point, and set that width to 5/8, which is 0.625. Hit return. There we go. So now I've got the glue flap. Let me adjust the artboard size so you can see it against a white. There we go. Alright, so now I've got my glue flap. I need to taper that glue flap down. Because again, if I misfold at all, I'm going to end up with that edge that doesn't quite tuck in. It's a glue flap. It doesn't need to show. So I'm going to take my direct select tool. I'm just going to select that top anchor point, shift arrow down twice, hit the bottom one here, shift arrow up twice. There we go. That's tapered in. So any way I fold that, it's going to hide behind everything. It's going to glue. Alright, So next thing I'm going to do is the top. I've got 4 square flaps here. They're the same size. I double checked it. I'm going to do these little flaps. So I'm going to select this large piece here. I'm going to copy it, paste it in front, set the reference point to the top, and do a flip vertical. Great. Set the reference point to the bottom and reset the height to being 1.875. Hit return. There we go. I've got that flap. And I need to taper it in ever so slightly. It's not a large taper like the glue flap, it's a small one. So I'm just going to move it, nudge it 1, 2, not down, 2, 3, 4, 5, and nudge the other side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's a slight taper there. I nudged it 5 points on either side because it's a really slight taper in. Yeah, I reset the height.
It's 1 and
1 and 7/8. So now that I've got this flap here, I know that, actually, I'm going to pause here. I'm going to do the other little corner flaps. And I'm only going to do one because once I have one set, rather than redraw it, I'm just going to duplicate it. So to do this little corner flap, I'm going to select it, Command C, Command F, flip vertical. There we go. Change that bottom reference to the bottom reference point, and that's 1 3/8 high. 3/8 is 0.375. So setting the height to 1.375. There we go. So it's a little bit shorter. So I need to move that in by 1/8 of an inch. So with the taper, it's actually coming in 1/8 of an inch on both sides. Did a little quick math there. So I can direct select that point, and I'm going to hit the return key to bring up my move dialog, and I'm just going to move it by 0.156, vertical move of 0, and hit OK. I know that that is tapering in correctly, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, so it's going to be a negative move because it's.
How did you get that move box up?
I just hit the return key.
So you're in the direct select.
Yep. Hit return. Yeah. Anytime you're selected on something, if you want to just bring up the move box, you just select it and hit the return key. That will bring up the move tool. So I'm going to zoom in on that point because this actually has a kind of a little bit of a triangle taper to it. Better on, maybe you can see it a little bit better. You can see that there's a little triangle taper.
Okay.
Yep. I know he's filming me. He's.
My undergrad's in TV.
Online and charge for it.
I'm gonna put on Blackboard.
He's gonna put it on Blackboard for you guys.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna bring in that taper. So I'm going to draw a guideline out and add in a couple points, not on my guide. So I'm going to make sure my guide is actually locked because it doesn't look like it is. There we go. I'm going to lock it. And I'm going to just add in a couple anchor points here right on that intersection if you have your smart guides turned on. And then I can move this anchor point over as well so that it's lining up. Oh, that's a little far. And do the same thing on this side. Yes. There we go. So now that I've got that taper set, this actually looks a little bit off. There we go. I've got this flap set, I've got that flap set. I need to duplicate those on all sides. So rather than going through that process again and making all of these individually, that stinks and I don't want to do it. The less you have to draw, the better. Most students can agree with that. The less I have to draw, the better. So I'm going to select both of these flaps And I'm just going to hit return to bring up my move dialog box. And again, I can see that the width of both of them selected, I can see this in my transform palette, is 8.625. So I'm just going to set it to 8.625 on a horizontal. Vertical move is 0 because I don't want it going up and down. I can check preview and see that that's moving to the correct spot. And most importantly, I'm going to hit the copy button. That will make an exact copy of that. Done. Let me zoom in on these a little bit. So now I just need to get all of these flipped over to the bottom. Mind blown. It's a lot easier. Like if you were sitting and drawing boxes and setting this up, it would take you 4 times as long. It takes so much longer to do it. So I've got all 4 of these. I just need to flip them over. So I can see that if I select everything here, the height is also 8.625. This is actually making a nice perfect square. So I'm going to select all the top pieces, set the reference, I'm going to hit the move key, move it horizontally 0, vertically 8.625, check the preview, that's okay, and I'm going to hit copy. So I've copied that down. I'm going to set my reference point to being the top, and I'm going to say flip vertical. Oops, and I'm going to have to move them again. Hang on. Let me set it to being the center. See if that'll get it right. There we go. Set the reference point to the center and hit flip vertical. So it just flipped them around. There we go. That's my that's a basic box template. Now I'm going to refine this.
We're going into business. Working here.
You call me. I used to be a package designer, so when I had to set up die lines, you get really fast at it because things change all the time. So I would save this right here in the event that my product manager comes back and says we're going to change the size. I've got individual boxes I can move around and adjust dimensions on. But if I'm saying I got final approval, or I'm going to, I would save a copy here. But if I say, okay, well, I want to actually get this to a production quality die line, I'm going to make some adjustments to this. And that being that your fold lines are always going to, if they're going to a vendor, fold lines are always dotted lines. Cut lines are always a solid stroke. So I need to actually physically set up my fold and my cut lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get these fold lines. So I know this line here is a fold line. I'm going to take my direct select tool and just select this line. I'm going to cut it, Command X, Command F, paste in place. So now I have this line by itself. I'm going to make some adjustments to it. The first thing being is I'm going to adjust the stroke color. And I'm going to adjust it to, let's say, a red. Actually, I'm going to adjust it to magenta. That's kind of a standard. And I'm going to adjust the stroke to being dotted. So in your stroke panel, you can click Show Options at that flyout menu, and underneath there is a dashed line option. So I'm going to set it to 5x5, 5-point dash 5-point gap. Cool. And I know you can't see that quite yet, but I'm also going to create a new layer in my Layers panel, and I'm going to call it Fold Lines. Cool. So I'm going to move that into the fold line layer. So now if I shut off the layer I was working on, I can see I've got just that dotted line. So I'm going to do all my fold lines on that layer. So I'm going to turn my layer 1 back on. I'm actually going to call this, rename it die line. So that's where my die line is. So I'm going to continue with this process here of getting all my fold lines set. So I'm going to select this one, cut it, paste in front, make it hot pink, make it dashed, move it, grab this line here because I know it's a fold line, cut it, paste it, move it, dash it. It will remember your dash lines once you set that. Last one here, cut it, paste it, move it, dash it. So it's kind of step and repeat.
When you say move it, you're not really...
I'm moving the layer. I'm moving it into the fold line layer. So, can actually do a couple of these all at the same time. Cut it, paste it. Just to kind of speed that up here. Move it onto my fold line layer. And then get all these down here at the bottom. I'm using the direct select tool, so I'm just selecting on that path. So I'm just getting that line, not the whole rectangle. So if you use not the direct select tool, you'll get the whole thing. Copy, or cut it, paste it. Make it pink, make it dashed, move it to the fold line layer. Okay, so I should have all of them. I'm going to turn off my die line layer. Oh, yep, that looks good. That looks glorious. All right. So let me turn off the die line layer and come back into my fold line layer and get my die lines. So I want to merge all of these pieces into one continuous path that will be cut. Because any place I've got a solid line, that's where they're cutting. So I don't want them to cut apart my folds, because then, well, I will have a whole bunch of individual pieces. So I'm going to select this whole thing. I'm going to jump up into my Pathfinder, and I'm going to click on the Unite option. That just united everything into one continuous path. So this is what your vendor sees, and they know they're cutting here, and now if I turn the fold lines back on, they know they're folding there. I can now see where I'm cutting and where I'm folding. The last thing I'm going to do is I need to set up my bleeds. So I'm going to grab my die line here, and I know I need a standard 1/8 inch bleed outside of the art. Why? Because if you misfold, you're also going to miscut. So I need artwork to extend 1/8 of an inch all the way around my box, because if they happen to miscut it, it's not going to be white. If you've ever mistakenly miscut something when you've cut out your projects, you get those yucky white edges if you don't have a bleed. If you set a bleed on it, oh, I miscut it, oh well, still looks good. Hedge your bets there. And that's a vendor standard. Like if you actually send artwork without a bleed, you'll get it kicked back as an error and delay in production. So I'm going to select this out to get my bleed and know where it is, where to stop things. I'm going to select the whole thing here, my whole die line. I'm going to go to Object, Path, Offset Path. And I'm going to set that to the standard 1.125, which is a 1/8 inch bleed. And I'm going to click Preview. And I can see that that's giving me a path all the way around for my 1/8 inch. I'm going to click
Object,
Path, Offset Path.
offset.
I'm going to click OK. So now this is my bleed. So I know this is where my artwork needs to stop. So I'm going to turn that into a guide. So I've got a guideline of where to do that. So to do that, I'm going to go to View, Guides, Make Guides, which is Command 5. So with that bleed line selected, I'm going to turn it into a guideline. There we go. Now I've got a guideline where I know where to stop my art. The reason your art needs to stop there, sometimes just students set it up where it just goes on forever, is it's fine at a student level, but when you hit a production level, every drop of ink you're doing, all the ink coverage is cost. So you stop, you only make as much art as you have to. If I just said, oh, I'll just make this whole thing black, this box is black, I'll just make this whole artboard black. Well, your company's paying to print black ink where they know it's past a bleed line. They're not going to want to do that. So, because it's costing way more money. If you think they're printing 100,000 of these boxes, even just having a little bit of ink here is costly. So that's why you want to go to that 1/8 inch all the way around and no further. No more, no less. Right there. So there we go. I've got my fold line set up. I've got my die line set up. So I'm going to lock both of those layers so I don't mess them up. I'm going to create a new layer called Artwork, or Art, or Litho, or whatever you want to call it. I'm going to place it underneath my fold lines, and this is the layer I'm going to work on. And that's where I'm going to place all my art, so that they're not interfering with the die lines, they're not interfering with the fold lines. And that, in a really short nutshell, is how you do it. You can also set up glue guides. That's not required for this project, but I would actually create another layer and call it glue guides. It may be helpful to you to do it. Set up a glue guides layer. I'll put that on top. And so that I know wherever I'm going to fill in, I set mine to blue just because that was my job standard once upon a time. I'm going to glue here on my glue flap, so I'm going to put in a little glue guide layer. I know that these flaps, I can see glue went there, glue went here. So if I look at that, they go right here. And here's my glue. So I know this is where the box is getting glued together. It's just in those spots, it looks like. So that may help you as well on knowing where to set up art. So I know that this is getting tucked under because it's getting glued. This is going over top, so this is where my artwork is gonna go. So if that's helpful for you to set it up so you know where to put artwork and you're not folding and being like, oh, just kidding, I just folded over my own artwork. You know, these flaps are the same size, so I need to make sure I'm folding it correctly. Make sense? Good? All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.